Another part of NASA's Space Launch System SLS rocket is over budget and will have schedule slips, and it's mostly Boeing's fault, to no surprise of anybody. But this news is official government news coming out of NASA Office of Inspector General today, OIG. They have a lot of damning things to say about Boeing's quality control and lack of skilled workforce, specifically having to do with the SLS Exploration Upper Stage, EUS. So that sounds fancy, but it's really just a new upper stage to the rocket, a new stage of the rocket that will have it be more powerful. That will turn the SLS Block 1, which is the current configuration that launched on Artemis 1, to SLS Block 1B, which is a slightly more powerful configuration. I am the executive director of space consulting firm Astrolytical, and I have been hesitant to talk about SLS and its problems, its many problems, because it's just so easy. It's a mess, and it has been for quite some time. However, this is an official report that came out today. You can read it yourself. It is linked below. There's a lot in here that just seems to add more evidence to the fact that Boeing is suffering severe problems right now in terms of quality control and management. And this is affecting multiple NASA programs. So most recently, we've been talking about Boeing's Starliner. But lest we forget that Boeing is the prime contractor for the SLS, that is the large rocket that NASA is using to launch astronauts to the surface of the moon. So the OIG is a government oversight agency located within various federal government agencies. NASA has its own OIG, and they take an independent look at NASA's programs. There's another government oversight agency that I'm going to talk about here. It's the Defense Contract Management Agency, DCMA. So I mentioned this new Exploration Upper Stage, EUS. It is currently envisioned to be used in Artemis IV. It was originally going to be used in Artemis II, and they moved it to Artemis IV for various reasons. Just like how I was just talking about how the Lunar Gateway, which is also envisioned to be used for Artemis IV, is not actually crucial to the success of the Artemis program, returning humans back to the moon sustainably. If you want to watch that video, you can link it above. It's a totally separate video about Lunar Gateway. This is another example of a very expensive side project that is absolutely not needed for returning humans back to the moon, because Artemis III is the mission that is envisioned to send humans to the surface of the moon and return them back to Earth. That does not need EUS or Gateway. So this is a very expensive upgrade that technically is not needed. But here we go. And I will tell you why a little later I think that this is going to be the way forward, at least for the time being. The EUS is envisioned to increase the performance of SLS by 40%. So that is from 27 metric tons under Block 1 to 38 metric tons with Block 1B to the moon. So it is an upgrade. It is a very expensive and delayed upgrade. The main finding of this report, Boeing is having problems with quality control, which again has been in the news for several reasons as of late, having to do with aviation and Starliner. Specifically, they point to the SAE International's AS9100D standards, and I'm probably saying that all wrong, but those are the standards that were pointed out in this report, as well as NASA's own standards. And according to this report, Boeing is not adhering to those international standards or NASA's standards. Some of the most problematic things called out in this report have to do with corrective action requests, CARs. There's 4 levels where Level 1 is the least severe. Level 4 is the most severe. Just briefly, I want to outline CAR Level 1 is issued for contractual nonconformity that can be corrected on the spot. CAR Level 2 is for contractual nonconformity that cannot be corrected on the spot. And then CAR Level 3 is when the supplier's top management needs to know what's going on because it's a severe contractual nonconformity. In this report, they identified that from September of 2021 to September of 2023, that 2-year period, DMCA issued Boeing 71 Level 1 and Level 2 cars. They had a draft Level 3 car that ultimately was not submitted. They don't really go into why, but you can see there, that's a lot. According to the report, that's a lot. Quoting from the report, according to DCMA officials, Boeing's process for addressing contractual noncompliance has been ineffective, and the company has generally been non-responsive in taking corrective actions when the same quality control issues reoccur. So this is just nuts to me. Like, they have a contract to NASA and they are not performing the work well, and they are being called out on it, but they aren't correcting the problem. The problems keep repeating itself. Like, they just don't seem to care that they have these problems, or they don't care enough to get those problems resolved. The report gives an example of a Level 2 car. Foreign object debris was identified inside the SLS Core Stage 2 liquid hydrogen fuel tank. DCMA they found contamination with metal shavings, Teflon, and other debris on and underneath the entry platform and ladder assembly on the forward dome panels inside of the tank. This is kind of mind-boggling to me because every aerospace high bay I've ever been in, FOD is a major, major issue. They've got signs, warnings everywhere about the dangers of FOD, foreign object debris. For FOD to be found inside the tank as well as in all these other places, like that to me is just sloppiness and is not expected of a major prime contractor to NASA, especially when human lives are on the line. Remember, SLS for Artemis I did not carry people, but every other Artemis mission that will use SLS, including SLS Block 1B with Artemis IV and forward, will have people on board. The report goes on to say that the quality control issue, they were specifically looking at Michoud Assembly Facility, that's NASA's center in New Orleans, so that's where this information mostly came from. There was a lack of trained and experienced aerospace professionals at Michoud working for Boeing. And apparently Boeing had a training program, but the report calls it ineffective. Here's another problem that the report called out, another example. In a visit to Michoud in April of 2023, they found a dome, and that dome had been set aside because they were trying to decide, NASA was trying to decide whether or not they could use it or whether they had to scrap it because the welding was not up to NASA's standards. This was an SLS Core Stage 3 liquid oxygen fuel tank dome, and it was on the critical path for EUS. And actually this dome, this dome problem, the bad welding, actually delayed the EUS for 7 months. And that's not just time, that's also money, right? The report goes on to caution that the lack of a trained and qualified workforce increases the risk that Boeing will continue to manufacture parts and components that do not adhere to NASA's requirements and industry standards. So speaking of money, we know that SLS equals lots and lots of money. So SLS was actually established by Congress back in 2010 under NASA Act. So SLS has been in development since 2011, although arguably you can say that Ares was like the initial part of SLS that got transferred over to SLS. Continuously, year after year after year, Congress has thrown money at this program, more than NASA has requested in some years. Most years, I think. According to the report, SLS Block 1B costs will reach approximately $5.7 billion before the system is scheduled to launch in 2028. And of course, Artemis IV will not actually be launching in 2028. That's just the date that they have on the calendar right now. There is no chance that Artemis IV is going to launch in 2028 because there's no chance that Artemis III is launching in 2027. Whole other tangent topic, but I'll keep reading. This is $700 million more than NASA's 2023 agency baseline commitment, which established the cost and schedule baseline at nearly $5 billion. These are huge amounts of money even for NASA. I mean, like, $5 billion is a lot of money. $5.7 billion is a lot of money. Like, NASA's budget is not huge. It's not like the DoD. They don't have an infinite amount of money. And they're over here canceling or threatening to cancel science programs because they don't have a spare, 2-digit millions. Now we're talking about, billions. Again, another tangent. EUS development accounts for more than half of this cost, which we estimate will increase from an initial cost of $962 million in 2017 to nearly $2.8 billion through 2028. Now, to be fair, the report calls out that Boeing wasn't the only problem here. Major problem, but not the only problem. So they list 5 reasons for the schedule delays and the cost increase. Redirection of EUS funding to core stage development, changing mission dates, maintaining EUS workforce, Boeing's manufacturing issues, and supply chain challenges. These reports don't just list problems, so they give 4 suggestions to NASA. They list, and I'm going to summarize here, coordinate with Boeing to develop a quality management system training program that is compliant with standards, institute financial penalties for Boeing's non-compliance with quality control standards, perform a detailed cost overrun analysis, and coordinate with DCMA to ensure contractual compliance. NASA has agreed with 3 of the 4. They are saying that they're not going to do penalties because already in the contract they can withhold performance fees. Like NASA actually has a history of giving Boeing, bonuses essentially, even though Boeing's work has been subpar. And so NASA is saying that they already contractually are able to withhold those bonuses, those performance fees from Boeing. Whether or not they do that, I don't know. So I hate to be a cynic, but I have been analyzing the Artemis program for before it was Artemis for 10 to 15 years now, and I truly don't think anything is going to change when it comes to this report. I think that Congress is still going to give SLS and Orion, those budget items, a huge amount of money. Boeing has no real financial incentive to fix things, to speed things along, because this is a cost plus contract. It's not like Starliner, where Boeing is losing money every time there's a problem or a delay. This is different. This is NASA and Congress giving money to NASA to give to Boeing despite the fact of all these problems, despite the delays. It's actually beneficial to these companies to have delays, to ask for more money, to need more money. I truly don't think anything is going to change with SLS. SLS extremely politically popular. It is nonpartisan. The way that the Artemis architecture is currently laid out does not make actual sense. However, it is currently what is the program of record, and I don't think that's going to change no matter who is president next year, no matter what the Congress layout looks like. Notably absent from these recommendations is any kind of suggestion of looking at alternatives to EUS, any commercial alternatives that are not Boeing. Some have pointed out that there are many. And also not in this report, although in other types of reports like this, there's no mention in this report that there are commercial alternatives to SLS coming on board. So because this report has no suggestion whatsoever that NASA change its course with Boeing and that Boeing do anything substantially different other than quality control and training, this tells me that pretty much nothing is going to change. I do believe that the only thing that will change is that over time, alternatives to SLS will come on board, and those alternatives will prove to be so much more cost effective, so much quicker in cadence, and so much more reliable that the choice will become more obvious to phase out SLS, but I do not think that will happen before Artemis IV.